Today is July 25th. We are about 78 years and a few days from the original nuclear explosion. And I was just thinking in the theater that I thought it was the 26th. Tomorrow will be Kubrick's birthday. So happy early birthday to Stanley. He would be, believe, 95. And I say that because Christopher Nolan is often compared to Kubrick these days, and he's not quite on that level. But he is one of my favorite filmmakers. I've been a fan since I was young, and of course, The Dark Knight is probably my type of Nolan film, and I think that Oppenheimer is, without question, I was very interested in this movie when I first saw the trailer some months ago, might have even been a year at this point. I can't remember when it was announced. And I'm confident in saying Oppenheimer is definitely the best Nolan film since at least Inception, and I think probably The Dark Knight. I can forgive him for Dunkirk, which I thought was honestly such a letdown. I don't want to use the word boring, but I thought Dunkirk was quite boring. But Oppenheimer is all the way through very interesting. And there's been a lot of hype and a lot of talk about it being one of the best, not only one of the best films of the year, but one of the best biographical films. And there's a lot of hyperbole being thrown around, but this is definitely one of Nolan's greatest achievements, and this is definitely, I think, his most mature film and probably his most honest film, probably that he's ever made in his career, to be honest. I don't know if it's better than The Dark Knight or Prestige or Memento, but I think it's on the same level. And this is a film that could not have been easy to make, given the scope of the people and the project itself that they're covering. But Christopher Nolan went into this with definitely a sense of conviction and a sense of morality. This is a film that there are various points throughout the movie. I think without the movie getting too sentimental, it does give you a sense of responsibility, especially the ending. I think the ending, I've seen a lot of people talking about how impactful the ending is, and I was kind of spoiled beforehand, but I think the ending is what I expected. I expected Nolan to try and tell the story objectively, but of course, there should be a statement at the end of the movie that is staunchly anti-war, because Oppenheimer was anti-war, and Oppenheimer, it is true, the film is actually quite historically accurate. There's a few liberties that might be taken, but nothing that is egregious at all. I think the movie is told at a very quick pace. 3 hours, I was going to say it was a little indulgent, but I actually don't think the movie was indulgent at all. I think this is probably up there as one of the best biographical films, because I do think that it takes a lot of concern. I think it takes a responsibility in telling the story of Oppenheimer as a man. He was a complicated figure. The screenplay is actually very well written because it's not only historically accurate, but it raises a lot of questions and points a lot of things out. For example, why is his name J. Robin Oppenheimer? This is a direct quote from the paraphrase, but direct quote from the script where they ask him, what does the J stand for? And no one knows. And then there's another scene where I can't remember who it was, but he was talking to Oppenheimer, and he says, "You're not even sure how you feel about this yourself, do you? About his involvement in the project and the way it was used. He's not even quite sure about his own morality." And you think about how he's unfaithful to his wife, even though a lot of people of the period were as well, and it's completely minor compared to taking people's lives. Even Einstein was a bit of a philanderer, but it's like he's not even quite sure who he is himself. He's not sure if he's a communist or if he's a patriot, but that's the way humans are. And so this is a very human depiction, and I think the performances are really great. I think Cillian Murphy, all I can say about him is you wonder if he could have been doing these kinds of roles much earlier in his career, and he obviously had the Peaky Blinders thing going on, and he was great on that. But giving him a leading role of such magnitude, he was fantastic in the movie. I think Emily Blunt, this is probably one of her best performances as well. I think Emily Blunt was great. I think that, of course, Robert Downey, definitely an actor I've always really appreciated, and they do give him a lot of screen time, but he is sort of presented as the antagonist, and it's not until at the very end that he has his big reveal as the antagonist, and it's actually Oppenheimer's wife who keeps insisting that no, he's the guy you need to watch out for, and she was right. And it turns out that in real life he did have some sort of a personal vendetta. It wasn't because he thought that, it's a little bit silly that the reason that they give in the movie is that he thought that the conversation that he had with Einstein was putting him against. It was actually something similar though. It was he Oppenheimer was hired at the Institute of Advanced Research. He took Strauss's position. Strauss was at the bottom of the list, and Oppenheimer was first on the list. So that was one of the things that he had a petty grudge against Oppenheimer. And of course, Oppenheimer was treated very unfairly. There was the communist craze. There was so much communist propaganda, and obviously for some good reason, because there were tons of spies. I don't know if there were actually that many at Los Alamos. Who knows? Nobody actually knows, but there were definitely spies in the government, in the military, and probably some scientists who were turncoats as well. But the way they treated Oppenheimer, especially since it was really more of a political thing, not because he was maybe a communist sympathizer, but because he was anti-war, and he was very begrudging about the nuclear arms race and proliferation. And he did want to encourage the American government, to be open. He wanted the scientific community and the military to be open with not only the public but with other governments, and they decided not to. And I don't think that Truman was as bad or as stupid as I feel like they kind of make him seem a little unintelligent. Perhaps I'm over analyzing him, but in real life, Truman was a lot smarter than he has given credit for. No, he wasn't perfect. You can maybe criticize some of his foreign policy, but you have to also understand that Truman had it rough. He didn't even know that the bomb existed. Oppenheimer knew much more about the bomb from the very beginning than even the vice president at the time, who then became president. And of course, they had to use the bomb, or at least they thought that they had to use the bomb. This is something I was arguing with people only the other day, and I was kind of a little bit annoyed. I was hoping that they would address it, and there's one scene where they do address it in the movie. At around the 2 hour mark, there's a short scene between Oppenheimer and Teller, where Oppenheimer admits that they've just told him that they, quote, bombed an enemy that was essentially defeated. Most people still think that without the bomb, the war would not have ended with the Japanese, which it's actually hard to say for sure. But what people don't like to admit is that the Soviets, at the same time, even though we didn't come clean completely about the magnitude of the weapon we had, and honestly, who knows to the extent that it was actually fully documented and publicized. I don't think anyone lived to tell the tale. Obviously, there were survivors of the explosion, and their conditions only worsened over time. But at that immediate moment, I think only the people who had actually seen the bomb and lived to walk away from, the immediate blast, those were the scientists. I don't think anyone knew how powerful the bomb was, but it was really the Soviets that invaded. They actually invaded, I believe, just days after, I think it was the next day after Nagasaki, I believe it was, that they decided to invade Manchuria. And I was arguing with people that we don't give enough credit to the Soviets for not only beating the Germans, but for beating the Japanese. We, of course, did the heavy lifting in the Pacific, but the Soviets betrayed the Japanese at the last moment, seeking the opportunity. And that was actually one of the most critical, that's one of the most critical events in history, because he not only gave It not only gave momentum back to the Chinese, to the CCP to take over, because the Japanese occupation of Korea and China during the war is what staved off communism, but it also weakened the ruling party, which was at least closer to the Democratic side, but it also showed America confirmed our suspicions that our enemy was going to be the Soviets, even though we have to this day manufactured our animus against Russia. We really shouldn't be enemies at all, but we looked at that moment and said, okay, we're going to have to make Japan our friend, even though we've just had this bloody war with them and humiliated them by making them test subjects. We're going to have to make Japan our friend to keep the Soviets away. But anyway, that's just a bit of history that's not really touched on in the movie. The movie is all about Oppenheimer and the complications of a human being who's also extremely intelligent and now has to deal with the aftermath of what he has created. And, I think that the script handles these events. The movie goes in a very quick pace and it has a lot of ground to cover. And at the first maybe 20 or 30 minutes, I thought there's too much cross-cutting and they're stuffing too much into it. And why is there not that I'm complaining at all, but Florence Pugh's performance, if you know what I'm saying, is there's one scene in particular that's quite dramatic during the hearing where he's having his fantasies. There's a lot of surrealist elements thrown in there, but I think it's important to explore his love life and to have those scenes to show that he was human, to show that he had competing influences. It's all a game of life is all a game of chess and how you navigate every situation. And it's really a great moment where there have been better scenes in other films with explosions going off, but it's all about how the power that he created was just taken away from him. For one minute he was being celebrated, and then the next they throw the bomb in a cart and they haul it off, and now everyone shuns him. The government shuns him, and that's really when he starts to act concerned. It was when everything was taken away, and that was an interesting quote that Strauss had at the end of the film, that he loved it. Oppenheimer loved himself when he was the mastermind of the Trinity. He didn't have to deal with all the backlashes, the person who bombed Hiroshima. And there's also that scene with Truman where Truman says, I'm the one that has the blood on my hands. No one gives a shit who you are. They only care about who used the weapon. So there's two sides to it. There's the side where Oppenheimer, he probably did deal with a lot of guilt, and then there's the other side where he probably would have liked to have been celebrated a bit more than he was, but I think maybe he didn't realize until it was too late that none of that was all worth it. So there's a lot of complicated subject matter, but it is a very interesting movie, even though it's not, Mission Impossible, all these crazy stunts and explosions. It's just really an intricate character study. It's more about the people. The people are more interesting than even the subject matter itself, which was the challenge of making something this ambitious. But they certainly did a great job at keeping the interest for 3 hours. It could have been very indulgent, but it was actually very entertaining all the way through, and they never lost focus. A little bit with the cross-cutting with the black and white scenes, and then back to color, and then 1 minute it's Oppenheimer, then it's Strauss, but I think they gave enough screen time to everyone. Matt Damon was great as he was much fatter in person, but I thought that Matt Damon did a good job bringing him to life. Groves was his name, yeah. Matt Damon was great as Groves. It was in the sense that it was a great character study. I would actually, it's not Lawrence of Arabia, and Lawrence of Arabia, to be clear, would be the much better film to see in 70 millimeter, although I think that even Lawrence Arabia has some Hollywood moments. I didn't feel as though there were too many Hollywood moments in this film. I think it was, like I said, I think it's the most mature film that Christopher Nolan has made. It's not something like Interstellar, which has lots of Hollywood moments. It's not, by that I mean, of course, bombastic and moments that are just trying to be crowd pleasers. This is a film that has drama, it has consequences. All the characters have consequences for their actions, and it leaves you with something to really think about. And I think it's a very honest movie all the way through. I think all the actors committed to telling the real story, and it doesn't take too many shortcuts. It doesn't use too much dramatization, and so there's a sense of responsibility, which is, I think, what the entire message was supposed to be about. And there's a lot of quotes I need to go back and watch the film again. There's that scene where there's the central debate in the second half of the movie is what happens when they build a bigger bomb, and Teller was the proponent of the H bomb, at least in the film, and Oppenheimer doesn't want to use the H bomb, and he's trying to convince the council not to use it, and then there's a character who tells him, well, they will believe you when you speak because you're a prophet, but the prophet can never be wrong. If the prophet, as soon as the prophet gets one thing wrong, you're no longer a prophet. And we see Oppenheimer at least once trip up during the cross-examination when he's trying to get his license renewed to be on the Atomic Committee, I believe, or the security, have his government security clearance to be an advisor. And but even then, it's all about the power that's being stripped away from him, because once you give that power, it's too big for anyone. It's too big for any government, let alone one person. But Oppenheimer was used. All the scientists were used, but they didn't have a choice. But there's a great sense of responsibility, which we all have, to history, and we should all look at this as not only a look at the past, but a look at the present and the future. And I really hope that things don't get out of hand. So this is actually, one of the most important films. I always say Doctor Strangelove. I still think that Doctor Strangelove, and this is the only thing that I want to say against all the praise, is that, don't forget about the other great biographical films. This one is up there, but don't forget about, Doctor Strangelove, which was made perhaps in a more serious time. I would say a more volatile time than even now. But this film maybe next to a film like Doctor Strangelove, because that's also about the bomb and what to do with it. And this is a bit more intimate. But there's one quote that reminded me sort of Lawrence of Arabia. I feel like Christopher Nolan must have seen Lawrence of Arabia in preparation for making this. There's one scene where Oppenheimer, they're commenting on Oppenheimer's ability. There's a few scenes, like I actually can't remember which one, but there's one scene where Oppenheimer gives himself some acknowledgement about, I think it might have been the prophet scene. And there's another great scene, another great line where he's like, I can't run the hamburger stand, but I can certainly run the Los Alamos. I can absolutely guide the project to build the most powerful weapon known to man. So I really liked that moment, because there's a bit of honesty and a bit of irony there at the same time. But yeah, this is definitely the movie that I was hoping it was going to be. This is the kind of film that you really hope that someone like Christopher Nolan could actually pull off. I think he's been working towards this film for a long time, and this is incredible momentum. I wonder what he's going to do next. Every time, I remember going to see The Dark Knight Rises 11 years ago, and going to see that opening day, and then going back to see it, and really being excited about that movie at the time. And then I have not been a fan of what he's done since then. But this is getting to the point where he should have been much earlier in his career, but he's gotten to this point. He's done a lot of original projects. Memento was very good early on, and then he did something like Insomnia, which was a adaptation, and then obviously Batman is an adaptation. I think The Prestige, I can't remember if The Prestige was based on anything in particular. Prestige was one of his better films. And obviously Inception was a 10 out of 10 concept, but not a 10 out of 10 execution. Just look at something like Persona, the Persona series, and you'll see what 10 out of 10 execution looks like. But this is definitely, you can't fault him for doing a film of this importance. Although I will end by saying, go and see Doctor Strangelove if you have not, because Doctor Strangelove is just as relevant. And Kubrick had the courage to make it back then in '63 when people needed to hear about it. And still to this day, it should be shown. It should be shown in every government back room. They should be showing. They should be showing to all the world leaders Doctor Strangelove. And Oppenheimer, I think I'm going to give Oppenheimer a 9 out of 10. I don't think it's a masterpiece, especially because it is of course, a biographical film could be, and maybe in that sense, I think it's probably about as good of a film, maybe, as you could make about the character. But as far as the situation itself, something like Doctor Strangelove, I think that goes beyond just a time and a place. I think that's more than just a character study, more than just a biopic, which is, at least in some senses, kind of a star vehicle. But again, the ending. When you think about moments in Oppenheimer, like the ending sequence, that's for everybody, and that's what we all need to think about, especially at this critical time where there are more nukes than ever and more powerful nukes than ever, which is something that you really have to understand, that we're in a even more serious time period than we were in the 40s and the 50s and even in the 60s, even though tensions probably aren't as heated as they were at that moment. But I'd say 9 out of 10. I think Oppenheimer's a great film and probably the best of the year, unless there's something else incredible that comes out. But this really puts in perspective where the other movies lie that are not trying to be anywhere near as serious and as mature and honest as Oppenheimer is. At least not the ones being made today. In the past, yes. So Oppenheimer, definitely one of the best films so far in the last couple of years, if maybe not even the last decade or so. Definitely worth going to see, and I'm proud for Christopher Nolan for really using all of his bags of tricks and his talent. And this is definitely the sign of a matured filmmaker who's very confident in his ability and who has learned a lot by going through the process, and obviously a great cast all the way around that was chosen for the right roles and for the right reasons. And yeah, I'm glad that Oppenheimer as a movie was made. And as for the nukes, I think we should all be very concerned, and we shouldn't be proud that they exist, but I hope that we continue to be responsible about them.